And then the last thing, before I pass it over, I've also created a helium cost workbook. And so I am not the person to talk about tanks and amount of usage, but I did create a calculator for you guys that includes tank sizes,
Right,
you
no
know,
problem.
high
Well,
float FAQs, and then also a cost calculator. So you can see based on helium, high float, and the ribbon, and also for foils, how you can calculate your costs. I'll also just mention that we have a really unique opportunity to tap into the luxury bouquet market. We don't really want to be in the space of competing with grocery stores, right? If we're in that space, people are going to think that this is a very cheap option, right? And sure, you can do volume, but your margins are going to be very slim when you're competing with grocers. So, perceived value and accessibility are going to be two things that you can really use to your advantage to increase your prices. Alissa and I will talk about that in a minute, but I'm going to hand it over to Bill so he can start to share a little bit about using a tank, some of the things you need to get started, tank safety, things like that. Bill, you
yeah,
ready?
yeah, I'd be glad to. And um, Alexis, does everybody, can they ask questions if they want to, or do they need to, do you need to let them in, or how does that work?
I think it would be great if you shared what you want and then we can ask you some questions. And then we're going to go
Okay.
on to Alissa, who has a lot of jam-packed content for a short period of time, and then open it up for questions again. So in the meantime, I guess if you have a question, go ahead and pop it in the chat and I'll kind of be the moderator on that.
Yeah, yeah, sure. That sounds good. And everybody, first of all, I'm Bill Albright with PS Helium and Balloons. If you haven't heard of us, we're located in Atlanta or north of Atlanta. We are a helium and balloon distributor. Uh, we really, I guess, since COVID, like everyone else in the balloon business, have really grown our balloon business, the number of brands that we carry and so forth. Um, Helium is in the name because that's kind of how my business started out, just primarily focusing on distributing helium. Okay, so so we have a lot of knowledge. We specialize in delivering to B2B, commercial grocery stores, florists, things like that. But we also we have a showroom. Okay, now our showroom's about 1,000 square feet, so we carry 5 balloon brands. We allow customers to pick up tanks. Okay. We do short term, we do long term rentals. And I know dealing with balloon artists and various people, everybody's situation seems to be a little bit different. Okay. Um, a lot of people shy away, I know, from using helium because if you've just gotten in the business in the last several years, it's pretty much all air filled, unless you're doing a bouquet of balloons that you wanted to float, uh, or a jumbo or something like that. It's really going to the airfield. We're actually seeing more and more people now kind of return to the helium because they're wanting to add something different. But basically, helium, if you're kind of new to it, first of all, I would say don't be afraid of it. Um, Depending on where you are located, you can rent helium cylinders, either short term or long term, or if you have your own, perhaps get it filled from a local uh, industrial gas company, a local, some party stores will do it. Welding companies are a great resource. Every town's got has at least one welding company. Welders use helium. And also the welding companies, they also will supply uh, a lot of balloon artists with helium as well. Okay. And usually you can get a better price from them. And they'll take the time to talk to you. Whereas Allard, Airgas, Nexair, companies like that, they really don't want to deal with the end user so much. They want to sell in bulk. to people like me. Okay. That doesn't mean if you're in a smaller town and you have a little satellite location that you can't develop a relationship with someone like that, though. Um, so yeah, so it's one of those things that there's so much about helium. Um, you will hear what kind of grade. Do I need to own the tank? Should I just rent it? Um, and then of course you're going to have to figure out what, if you're not already aware, what resources you have locally. Okay. We only distribute and service people in the Atlanta metro area. Okay. We have a pretty broad delivery area. But then again, we only deliver to businesses. We will not deliver to a residence. A lot of that has to do with insurance. Okay. But we allow customer pickup on all of our tanks. Okay. Um, so yeah, so I know there's a lot of questions um, Alexis, you wanted to talk about like volume and so forth, I think a little bit. Um, you know, how much helium does a balloon take? How much helium, what size tank do I need? I know Alyssa's going to go over a lot of things, so I'm just going to
So
say
what
one more
about,
thing about.
yeah, why don't you tell us like what is the starter pack? Because I went online to figure out, okay, I need a tank. Do I need more than one nozzle? Do I need to strap it to the wall? Is there a safety issue with the tank
Yeah,
itself? I have young kids, so I want to make sure, this thing is not like I'm gonna
sure.
do something crazy in my garage, right?
Right, right. First of all, helium is not liquid, so the tanks you can lay them down. Okay,
Okay.
you can lay them down in a vehicle or wherever. You can inflate with them laying on their side. Okay, that's always an option. A lot of people will lay one in the back of their vehicle in their car and work out of their trunk if they're working outside at an event, even. Um, but yes, if you are working around a group of people where you're afraid that helium cylinder may fall over, and normally they will because they're so top heavy, okay,
Okay.
you're going to want to either put it on a hand truck, just a regular two-wheel dolly hand truck, but strap it to it either with a ratchet strap or bungee cords, just something secure to make sure that it doesn't get knocked over on you or someone else. Okay. It's not going to hurt the tank so much. Most tanks are steel. It may break your balloon regulator, okay, but normally it's just a matter of it hurting you, someone else, or the property that it falls on. And as far as we sell safety brackets, Velcro straps, metal wall brackets that have a chain on them. We sell floor stands for helium tanks. They're metal floor stands. You can take it wherever the tank goes. If you're at a festival, that's a perfect thing to have. Or if you're in a ballroom, okay, and it's on carpet, carpet's always, you know, it's not very secure. A helium stand is perfect for you. Okay, we sell them for I think about $69. Um, those we do ship. We ship all of our safety equipment all over the country. But if you are renting from a local business, they probably will have something that you can purchase as well. Okay. Uh, but yeah, and then I guess the last thing I was going to say, Alexis, before Alissa maybe wants to kind of chime in here too, or questions want to be asked, is volume. One of the things about volume, it's just a matter of knowing. Helium, we talk, is sold in cubic feet. It's a cubic foot price. Okay, it's high pressure air, and it's you're going to have to know how many cubic feet each balloon that you're inflating requires, and then you're going to do the math and figure out how many cubic feet you're going to need to fill those balloons. Okay. And then you would go talk to an industrial gas person like me, and say, hey, I've got so many balloons, or I need so many cubic feet of helium. What do you suggest? Okay. Um, yeah, and I know Alyssa has a lot of methods that she probably uses to calculate and also get that information because there's so many balloons. How do I figure out what the volume is for each balloon? You know?
Yeah. Alyssa, are you going to talk about that?
Uh, I'll touch on it, yes.
Okay. I guess last question. There seem to be a lot of nozzles on there. Do I buy one nozzle or do I that is adjustable or am I buying multiple nozzles? What do I need for
Yeah.
that?
Well, I mean, you know, if you want to do it right, if you're inflating latex and you're inflating foil balloons, you're better off purchasing what's called a dual regulator. It's got a rubber tilt valve, which you will use for your latex balloons. And it also has a brass pushdown valve, a tip, that is meant for the foil balloons. Okay.
Okay.
The tip slides in the sleeve of the foil balloon. And the idea with that is that it will cut off from the backflow of the pressure once the balloon's full, so you don't pop it.
Oh, nice. Okay. That's
Yeah.
good. Okay.
And then of course there's 60/40 regulators. I know Alyssa's gonna, I think, get into a little bit of that, why you would use one, when to use it, when not. And I'll be glad to um,
Chime in on that.
answer any questions about that as well, if anybody has them.
Okay. Does the actual nozzle or isn't there a dial? Is that showing you how many cubic feet are left in the tank?
What that is showing you, a balloon, and I should have brought one with me here on the
I'm
desk.
showing it.
Yeah, there you go.
This one's speaking up.
So, yeah, so I can't see it perfectly, but it looks like Alyssa's gauge goes to 4,000, that's PSI, pounds per square inch, okay? Most helium tanks, most as a general rule, are going to be somewhere around 2,000 PSI when they're full, okay?
Okay.
Um, so that's PSI, so it's measured in PSI, in pressure, okay? So if you have a tank, let's say the 219 cubic foot tank that you usually use, Alyssa, um, when that's full, um, let's say you've done 200 balloons, you think you counted out that you've inflated. And now your gauge, the needle has gone from 2,000 pounds being full down to 1,000 pounds. Well, then your tank is roughly about half full, right?
Mhm.
Pretty simple. So you would think, probably going to get about another 2,000, or I'm sorry, 200 11 or 12-inch latex balloons out of it.
Right.
You will, after you use the regulators in the tanks, you'll develop knowledge very quickly so that everybody will blow up a balloon a little different, a latex balloon, okay? Because
Right.
there's variances, they stretch. Foil balloons, there's a limit, right? You can
Right.
only go so big. Uh, and then, of course, there's the question about how much do I let leak out as I do it, right? How many get away? So there are a lot of variables, but no, I am not aware of in my 30 years uh, to measure actually uh, out of a cylinder what's coming out of there, other than a timer. Okay, like on an electric air inflator, we have the same thing for a helium tank. Uh, you can measure it by time. Okay, but you really don't know the volume. You just know how large that balloon is, you know.
Right. Okay. Seems like there's a lot of room for error, so you should just mark that up in your pricing.
Well, yeah, well, no, I mean that's why you've got to start somewhere, right?
Right.
We do our due diligence when we rent helium tanks because people call us all the time. How many? So this tank does 80 balloons. Well, wait, yes, theoretically, I'm always very careful to explain to people, and that's what my people, what I've always been trained to do. We, we work with the customer. You have to ask questions, right? Uh, you got to get other people's knowledge. You know, I
Mhm.
do it every day, and And that's going to be the key. But like you say, you do have to start somewhere. And I think that's kind of what I'm trying to help with tonight is just kind of get people started. And I know Alyssa's going to do the same thing. And yeah, and of course, people are always welcome to reach out to us.
Okay, last question, and then I'm going to kick it over to Alissa. We've all seen those red balloon time tanks that you can get at Target. I've purchased one of those. The balloons are drooping in an hour, right? What is the difference between a tank like that and a professional grade tank so we can educate our customers on why it's important to go with a professional?
Well, you know, the balloon time tanks or party time tanks, they are not high pressure. They're thin metal. Okay. There's not a lot of helium in there because they can't be pressurized. Okay. Our smallest tank, a 20 cubic foot tank, is much smaller than their average size tank. Okay. But it holds probably 3 times the volume of gas because it's pressurized to 2000 PSI. Okay. So everybody complains that those tanks do not inflate a lot of balloons. It always usually says on the side, oh, it'll blow up 39-inch balloons. Well, you shouldn't be blowing up 9-inch balloons with helium unless you're giving them away like at a fair. And that's what those were always great for because they used half the helium of an 11-inch balloon. People would put their logo on it. They could hand it to a kid, make them happy, and they would carry it around with their logo on it for 4 or 5 hours because that's all it would last because it was so small. Okay. Um, and then they're disposable. You cannot refill those. Well, manufacturer probably can, but we cannot. They're not rated to be refilled. So now you've got a lot of waste. The cost in those, most of the cost is in the packaging, the box, and the metal container. So it just serves a purpose. It's almost like an emergency thing, or you're traveling somewhere, you're having a quick party at a hotel, you don't have time to go pick up a rental and you don't have time to take it back. And it's more of a convenience item, I think, than anything.
Thanks, Bill. We're excited to have you. I really appreciate it. Alissa, you want to get started?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Okay, so I'm going to touch on the party time tank for a minute because I'm going to start with brass tacks, just assuming that nobody knows how to do anything. Because that's always for me a good place to start. So I'm going to be showing you my tanks. I'm going to show you how I change my nozzle, how I open a tank, and also how I transfill to another tank. I do have both large and smaller tanks. My big one is a 219, which is a large, not an extra large. I'm going to give you so much information and I'll answer questions at the end because I'm going to go really fast. Okay, so as Bill touched on with the party time tank, it says that it does 33 balloons. It does 33 9-inch, which means that it does approximately a dozen of the 12-inch or approximately 3 of the 17-inch. So it doesn't do too many. The reason that I used to keep a party time tank in my car was before I had a transfill system. So that way, if I was doing a delivery and I was guaranteeing the balloons, then if one popped, then I would just be able to fill it with that one and I would keep track of how much helium I used. So that's really the only purpose for a professional decorator. Okay, so I'm going to be flipping this around and showing my tanks. Okay, so I do have mine with a floor stand. So they are secured at the bottom on the ground, not attached to the wall. That way I'm able to move them around if I need to. So I'm going to pick this up and show you really quick. I'm going to turn it on. This tank is done. See how my pressure is at 0. So the other way to tell, but see how I can't turn and get this off? That's because there's still a little bit of pressure. So whenever you're taking a nozzle off, you always need to turn it off and then release the pressure. And then it's going to turn easily.
Okay.
So that's the first thing. Like you're not going to be able to get it off. I left my one that I keep one that has a latex, a regular 100% helium soft latex inflator in our van, but it's not the one that I keep in the shop because we do mostly use 60/40. So this is a 60/40 regulator. And what that means is that when you push down on it, see this little hole right here, it's going to have air coming through here. So it's going to mix so that you get 60% helium and 40% air. So that does decrease float time. If you do want to switch it to 100% helium, you could use the same regulator. And all that I do is I cover the holes. Because if you cover the holes and push down, then you're going to have 100% helium. And if you push down this way, then it's 60% helium, 40% air.
Okay.
This is my foil regulator, which I'll be showing how to use. And you just simply push that up and that's going to have the helium going. Okay. I'm going to show
Sorry,
you.
Bill said something about a metal tip. It looked like there was a metal tip on that inflator. Does that do anything there?
This metal tip, this is this is like one of those tying devices to help you tie a balloon, I think. And we used to get like these little discs that you could put on the end instead of having to tie it, and you would store it on it. I've never used it for anything. If Bill knows any more about it, then he could chime in on that. But it's not something that I ever use. I ignore it. Mine's also bent. I don't know. All my equipment is really beat up, as you're going to see. A lot of it's old. Okay, so when you get a tank, it always needs to be transported with the cap on, because what the cap does is it protects the neck. So you never want to be moving it around, even in your shop, without a cap. That is really important. If I could say one thing, never move it without a cap. And the reason why is because the only way that you will hurt yourself more than I tore my rotator cuff loading one of these into the back of my van. That's why I got a small one now. But is like breaking a toe is if this somehow hits something and comes off, that however much pressure is, that's per square inch. So that's 2,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. So this becomes a rocket. So what the cap does is it prevents the top from breaking off so that it's safe. Usually when you receive it, it's going to have plastic over it. My husband gets my tanks, so he always loosens it and takes it off for me, because sometimes these are really hard to get off. If you are having trouble, we occasionally will insert a tool into the little side hole, because that's what protects this. It lets the air out so that it doesn't, so this also doesn't become a missile if it for some reason breaks off. And then we'll use that to twist it off. So sometimes that is hard to get off.
Alissa, do these tanks come with the top, even the smaller tanks?
Okay, so my small tank actually does not have a cap. And the reason why, most of them do, but this one has this plastic thing that protects it. And you can see I have dropped mine and it hit from the side, but mine is actually a little bit bent. But this one I cannot put a cap on, but this protects it on this one, so I can't even put a cap onto it. So this is my travel size tank, and it does approximately 100 balloons in this size. Okay, I am going to talk about transfilling super quick, and what that is that's the process where you take the helium out of the big tank and you put it into the little tank. Did I describe that right? Bill, please correct me if I say anything that's wrong. This thing, if you do a lot of helium and have to bring it to events, is a godsend. So what it is pretty much one valve, a tube, and another valve.
Okay.
That's it. Okay, so I'm going to demonstrate. So you literally just line it up exactly like you would with your regular valve and twist it in. Sorry, I'm at a weird angle. You want to get it all the way in, because otherwise what's going to happen is it's not going to, you could get some leaks. I make sure this is closed. I knew that would be open because I open it to release pressure to get it off every time I transfill.
Okay.
And then I'm going to take this end and I'm going to do the exact same thing where I'm going to put it into my tank. Okay, so Bill had talked about how when it's a new tank, how it has 2,000 pounds of pressure. So the way that this works is it's based upon an equilibrium. So you could really only fill your small tank all the way when your big tank is full. So even when I get a new tank, I always like do a top off on my small tank, even if it's mostly full. And I think this one is about half full right now. Let me back up. Can everybody see? Just chime in if you need me to move. Okay. So since this is full, when it turns on, you can see that it's slightly over 2,000 pounds of pressure.
Okay.
My
And that's
tank-
as much as could be in there, right? That's the max.
Yeah. Mine come anywhere from about a little slightly under 2,000 to 2,200 is where mine get topped off at from our distributor. We do use a welding company for it. And depending upon the size tank, but say that this was only filled. So what it's going to do is it's going to take the air, if everyone remembers their science classes, and like where it balances. So it's going to make it so that when I open this one, do you hear that noise? Okay.
No, but I can
So
imagine.
it's making a slight noise. I can hear the air going. So this one was a little bit under 1,000 pounds of pressure. And what it's going to do is fill them until the pressure is even in each tank. So it's not going to go completely up to 2,000 on this tank. It's really going to go to about 1,700 pounds on both tanks by the time that it fills it, if that makes sense. Because what you're doing is you're taking the air out of the one and you're putting it into the other. So, and then when they're both the same is when the air stops flowing into it. So if I only am at 1,000 pounds on my big tank, I could only put a maximum of 500 pounds into my small tank. So I could only fill it approximately a quarter of the way. Does that make sense?
Okay. So it's
So
truly a science project. You have to be good at science.
just always fill your tank when it's full. If you try to transfill when you don't have a full tank, you're not going to put gas into the big tank. You can't, you can't take like all of it out.
There's
It
no
just
suction.
equalizes.
There's no like if you siphon like gas out of your tank into something else, it's not like that. There's nothing siphoning it.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. That's the best way to describe it. Okay, so while that's filling, I am going to go ahead and skip to the next thing. And I want to make sure this is all the way.
Is this a long process?
It usually takes just a couple minutes.
Okay.
So, okay, I'm going to talk about high float on the latex really quickly. I'm not going to go a lot into it because high float literally just did an Instagram live about this that they did for an entire hour that covered much more information than I could ever cover with it. But I am going to show you how we put it into the balloons. Essentially, if you fill your balloon and it does not have high, oh, sorry. I think that there was a question that came in that was about the temperature of the gas. Bill, would you be able to answer that? Because she said that she filled a Bobo and that it wasn't floating because it's so cold out. She's also in the Chicagoland area and we're like minus 20 right now. So fun. But she said that it wasn't floating afterwards. And we do fill in a temperature controlled area. So, but helium does stop moving as quickly, but I don't know if less of it goes into a balloon. So I didn't really know how to answer her question.
Yeah, well, yeah, so temperature definitely does affect helium, okay? Yeah, helium expands with heat and it contracts with cooler air, okay? That's why if you've ever purchased a Mylar, a foil balloon at a dollar store, grocery store, party store, in the wintertime, they fill it up inside and you carry it out to your car and you start to put it in your car and the foil looks uh, like it's going down, it's losing air, right? Well, what's happened is those atoms, those molecules have shrunk, okay? And so the balloon's sagging, right? And then so you run back in the store to the counter and you start complaining, oh, my balloon's, going down. And all of a sudden you look at your balloon again and it's full. It's because it's come
Yeah,
back
but
to the room temperature and the helium's expanded again. So, or the balloon's expanded. And so that's kind of how that works. Um, um,
but does it affect
you,
the pressure of how much is coming out of the tank? Because I think that that was more the question. So with it,
uh, it does, as far as volume, or it doesn't really affect the pressure coming out of the tank. What'll happen though is you're going to get a lower reading on your on the tank gauge there, the valve, when it's cold, opposed to when it's warm. Okay. Um, our regulator gauges have a little green mark between 1800 psi and 2200 psi. Okay. 2,000 pounds in the middle is full, but there's a range because it depends on the temperature at the time. You take a reading, all right, uh, and that's going to vary a little bit. You're better off whenever possible inflating balloons in the environment that they're going to be used, when possible. You know,
okay,
that way you don't have a lot of variance.
makes sense to me. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this machine. So you could see that it was at about 2,100 pounds of pressure. And now after I transfilled, I am about 1,900 pounds, which means that I would have 1,900 pounds in this tank and 1,900 pounds in that tank for it to be completely full after a transfill. Maybe that's a 1,600, sorry. So after I do that, I'm down to 1,600 pounds, but that's because all the helium is inside the other tank. So that's how that process works. Okay, so with high float, I know one of the other questions that we received was, should you let the high float dry in the balloon? And the answer is no. Okay, so I'm going to high float this clear balloon for us. And I am using the tiny one. This is the one in our Go kit. We have all different sizes. What you want to make sure is that you push it to the edge of the balloon. And then you're going to push all the way down on a 12-inch with this size. That's why I'm using this size, because we actually fill from our big ones into this one when I have staff doing it, because they never put enough high float in otherwise. And this way, if they do one full pump, then it's correct to fill. So you could see when I put it in how it's coated the entire top, and you really don't have to move it that much, but now it's coated the entire balloon.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do is I fill mostly with 60-40, and you just take the balloon, put it over the edge, and I stop when it starts to get like bulby. This would be a full 11 inches. One of the best things that I ever learned for time saving is that I do not tie my balloon twice. So what I do, we take our ribbon, we lay it over, and then we tie the balloon. So the ribbon is in the balloon and it's going to float. What's nice about these regulators is you don't have to look for your scissors all the time, because there's like a little cutter that's right there too. Okay, so I did high float some balloons in advance, and I'm going to show that one more time. So again, you just put it all the way up to the top, push down, squish it around. Again, I'm acting like, tell me like it's, this is a 60-40 mix. Pull the ribbon, lay it across, and then tie it in. So not only does that save time because you're not doing two ties, which saves your time and saves your fingers, but it also makes it so that you could adjust your bouquets on the fly, which I'll show you when we're hiding them, because now it's going to slide up and down on your ribbon. So if you don't like where it's at arranged in your bouquet, then you're going to be able to easily change it. So those are filled with 60/40. If you have a 100% helium, no high float, an 11-inch balloon is going to float, depending upon your altitude, anywhere from about 16 to 24 hours. If you have it with 60/40, then you're only going to be getting like 12 to 16 hours. But if you do it with high float in the winter, then you're going to get a few weeks. Some things that I make sure that I have is I constantly run a dehumidifier in my shop, even in the winter. So because high float needs to dry inside your balloons, you could tell if you look at this clear one, how it's like a tiny bit wet around it. What happens is it's going to dry and turn into a plastic. So that's why you don't want it to dry ahead of time, but you do want to wait a few hours before you bag your balloons. If you're just starting to experiment with helium, then what I recommend is that you actually inflate a clear balloon with the high float. So that way you could see at the different humidity in your shop how long it's going to take for that balloon to dry. Because once you bag it, it severely cuts down the dry time. And if the high float doesn't dry, or if it takes a long time to dry, then you're not going to get a really good float time on it. That's why even with low humidity in my shop, they'll float for like, I'll have balloons that will float for weeks in here. I'm looking. I had one that was up for like 3 weeks, but I think it finally fell down this week. But
Well, so you
if
said
it's
that
over
that's
the summer, you get like 4 days, even with high float.
okay. So you said that, yeah. So when it is hot, you said, so when it's cold, even 16 to 24 hours. So like, what are we looking at when it is hot? Like, is it even less than that with high float?
So it has more, yeah, it has more to do with the humidity than it does with the heat. The temperature doesn't matter as much as the humidity, but that's why I run a dehumidifier. I don't keep it above 30% humidity in my shop. And over the winter, we need to empty it like once a month. And over the summer, I run 2 of them, and we sometimes have to empty it twice a day, depending upon how humid it is. So that's just a really good thing to know. I'm going to fill a foil now. Does anyone have any questions on that? If they want to put them into the chat, then I'll.
Yeah, I think there's still some confusion on the float time difference. Can you just repeat if it's with the 60/40, how long will it stay floating?
It really, so without high float, it'll only float for about 12 to 16 hours. And what it also depends upon is your altitude. So because if you're higher up in the mountains, it's not going to float as long if you're at a higher altitude as if you're at sea level. So, but if you use high float, that is more where it gets seasonal, because with or without, whether you use 100% helium or 60/40, even with 60/40, my balloons are going to float for a couple weeks in the winter. In the summer, just because it's more humid, once they leave here, so it's not as temperature controlled, because the thing that I learned from the high float webinar is that just like it leaves, it actually, if it's really humid out, it dampens the high float again. So it like re-wets inside the balloon, which is why we have a shorter time during the summer on it. I never knew that before. I always wondered why, but that's why. So personally, what we do is we inflate all of our helium balloons a day in advance that are latex, that are treated with high float, just because that way we know if we have any bad ones, we know that we're temperature controlled, and we know that everything is going to have time to dry. So that's our solution to that problem, because you don't want to inflate it and then you're bagging it, because if you give it to your customer and the high float isn't dry and they leave it in the bag, if they weren't going to use it until the next day, then they may take it out and everything's going to be drooping still. And that's the reason why. So it needs to fully dry before you bag it. Okay.
Got it.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and jump to a foil, and you essentially are looking for the same valve that you would use in order to air fill it. And you're just going to.
And just for clarification, you would never high float a foil, right?
Don't high float a foil, correct?
Okay.
So one of the things that you want to look at, so if it's not filling, Yeah, this thing's fine. You just need to straighten out the valve. So one of the things to be careful about is that not all balloons are going to float with helium because they're too heavy. That's why sometimes you'll see a foil like the 16-inch letters and numbers, or even some of those shapes. They don't float, and it's because there's not enough helium in order to lift it. So you always want to make sure that you are using at least an 18-inch balloon. But it has to be like an 18-inch round or an 18 to 20-inch shape. Anything smaller than that isn't going to float. A lot of people experiment with getting some of the Amazon balloons. Even the larger Amazon balloons don't always float with helium, and that's because they don't make it out of the same material, so they're heavier. That's why I don't like to fill balloons that customers bring in, is because we don't know how they were cared for, and sometimes they're just too heavy and they're not going to float and they're going to be disappointed. I'm going to go to Party City in this reference because you notice how when I was filling it, that as soon as it stopped on its own, I didn't just keep on pushing it up and trying to fill the balloon. That's because I don't like to overfill my balloons. So I like to have a little bit of squish. Even in the winter, I like to have a little bit of squish just because of the temperature changes. Because as Bill mentioned, so you'll notice that even with your air-filled foils, that sometimes they'll go down a little bit during the winter, but then how they'll pop during the summer. Well, helium is more active than air is. Like the molecules move faster than air. That's why it floats, is because it's like the molecules are just zooming around. That's how it was explained to me. So it doesn't.
Is there ever a scenario where you would overfill it?
No, because you could blow out the valve. So even what I even do in the summer is I purposely underinflate if I transport in my van, because the back of my van isn't temperature controlled. So I'll only fill about 3/4 of the way, or sometimes half of the way if it's like 100 degrees out. And then I'll top it off when I get there if it needs a little bit more.
Is it fair to say, so if you have an employee that you want to be filling helium balloons, you're trying to get this pickup business going, there's not a lot of room for error for your employee filling foils, right?
It's good as long as they don't overfill. Like if they just fill it properly, then it's going to be okay. As long as it's, not going to be a long time in a car. We give instructions to our customers where they say that they have to have their car air conditioned, that they're not going to be putting it into a hot car, that it's going to be air conditioned, because if you put it into a 120-degree car, then again, it could pop the valve. So that way it's not our responsibility to change it out, even though sometimes you need to think about what are you doing for customer service, right? But that is the one concern there. I'm going to go to tying the balloon. I know that some people like to teach it with a slip knot, so that way they're all the same. The reason that you would do that is so that it can't slide off. I personally like to roll my tabs. One of the reasons why is because I feel like it looks a little bit more professional than if this is just hanging down. So how I do that, could everybody see? Could you see what I'm doing? Okay. If I tie it towards the end, then I'm going to roll it. And then I'm going to just tie it one more time. Okay. So
Does that
now
just the nozzle as well?
Yeah, so that covers the nozzle as well. If I know that I'm going to be filling it more, then I don't roll it yet. What I'll do is I'll leave it just tied to the end. So that way, if it's hot and it's the summer and I'm going to fill it up more when I get to my location, then I'm able to do that, and then I roll my tab afterwards. The reason why I do it, especially if it's going outside, is to see how this isn't pulling off. So it's not going to slide off of the balloon because it pulls on the roll, so it can't pull off of the outside. So that's really nice, especially if it's super windy out. And I don't know, I just think that it looks more professional than having the valve hanging down. Because sometimes those little touches are just what elevates your decor.
Alissa, is there any scenario where you would use a 60/40 regulator tip in a foil balloon of any type?
I have filled some of them with, partial air. The times that I've done it has been like if I'm doing one of the super shapes or one of the megaloons, or if I'm doing like one of those giant hearts. But then I actually fill it with air first, about a quarter of the way or half of the way. Sometimes that's like a whole class on its own, those giant shapes, but you can put
Right.
air into it. But what I'll do is I'll actually fill it until it gets to like a floating point, because then after it's floating, I know that it has enough helium to lift it, and then I'll add the air in afterwards.
Right.
Um, some of the things that I've done, like when I've only had, say, this nozzle and not had my other nozzle, is that I will, because we always keep straws. I only have this super long straw because I'm going to double stuff, but give me a second. I don't really have any small straws, but when I've forgotten my tip, when I've forgotten my regular helium nozzle, what I've done is I've taken a straw, put it in, like put it into the tip of the balloon, and then I've put it into the top, and I've been able to push it down and fill it with helium that way. So that's a good thing to do if, say, you accidentally brought the wrong regulator, because we all make mistakes. And so you figure out how to do those things when you make mistakes. I've made every mistake in the book, some of them like way too many times. um, but yeah, usually it's like I find that if it's not at least a 36-inch, that it's really finicky with adding any air to it. So you're better off just doing 100% helium.
And
Have you
again,
found that?
that's because of the weight. That's because of the
Yes.
weight of the foil, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So really, I guess, I've always found it's best to stay away from the 60/40 regulators and foils, unless you've experienced and you're, like you say, you're doing a 36-inch orb, well, or sphere, as we
Mm-hmm.
call them now, especially, 50, 60-inch severe, you can probably get away with it, but anything else is going to be a disaster.
Okay, I am grabbing. So what's crazy is, okay, so this was for an event that was in December, and you can see that it's underinflated. So I do find, like, if you don't have the latex tip, because when you're filling on the helium, if you're doing an orb or a sphere, it's this kind of tip isn't going to fill it all the way with helium. I'll just demonstrate. But you can see that we're already at a point where it's floating. So I would be able to do the rest of this with air right now. So sometimes what we even do on these is we'll fill it till it stops. And we still have some wrinkles. This one's been pre-inflated. And then we will be able to go the rest of the way with the hand pump if you do want to save, or if you just can't get it the rest of the way because, say that you don't have a latex inflator, you only have a 60/40 tip and the helium tip, then you could fill it with the helium nozzle, and then you could finish it off with air with the hand pump, and it's going to be fine. The only time that it wouldn't be fine is if you do want to hang some sort of embellishment from it, because again, that adds weight. And in this case, we were hanging plastic fringe, not foil fringe. This is a plastic. Just want to clarify, we're not violating California balloon law. Super important. Don't use metallic ribbon on metallic foils. I don't even think, Bill, have you found out? That's a question that I'd like to ask you. Have you found, because I think this has been a point of contention lately with these fringe balloons, and I looked it up, and the fringe that I buy is a plastic, even though it's shiny. But are any of those actually a metal? Or do people even sell metallic ribbon? I thought that all the metallic ribbon was made of plastic, not made of metal now.
I don't sell the metallic ribbon. I used to years ago. It is heavier,
Mm-hmm.
but it shouldn't make that much of a difference, I don't think. To answer your question, I'm not exactly sure what the material is, and different brands, it could differ as well. But as long as the ribbon is not too long,
Mhm.
you shouldn't have any problem. I mean, look at all the metallic fringe you have on that.
Exactly. So because we sell a lot of fringed out balloons. So the reason why I mentioned that is because everybody who's doing helium should look up the California balloon law. And the things that that says is that you're not going to be purposely releasing balloons into the air, that you're going to secure all of your foils individually when they're in a bouquet to the weight instead of tying them together. And also that you're not going to use a metal ribbon on a metal balloon. The reason that is because, and this is why it affects Alexis being in California, is a lot of foil helium balloons are banned because if you have a metal balloon and it gets caught in a power line, and then you have a metal ribbon and it crosses to the other power line, then it actually shorts it out and takes the power out, and it could happen in an entire neighborhood.
That happened in my neighborhood, and I called my business partner. I'm like, they're gonna think it was us, like it wasn't ours.
So that's funny. I mean, it's not funny that it happened, but it's
Yeah.
funny that you reacted that way. Okay, so one of the things that I like to do is I find that helium, and we are putting in a pricing calculator, and I like to work at least a 50% profit margin, but I find that if you add different embellishments, then you're able to increase your profit margin to go up. And that's a really easy way to do it. But if you're going to be adding an embellishment, then you're adding weight. So if you do that, then you want to use 100% helium. So I'm going to be adding some little 5-inch to these. I call those teardrops just because we add them to our bouquets, and then we could sell, like, if we put on a teardrop or a squiggle, you could sell it for so much more. So if I do that, I'm going to fill it with 100% helium. So I'm going to cover this. Release. And then tie it in. One of the things that I do with staff is I actually time how fast. It's okay that I forgot because the 5 inches is too full. So it's okay to like cover it a little bit into it. Is I time. I know we have benchmarks, and I actually give raises at the benchmarks. I find that it's a good way for me to incent my employees to learn more and to do more. Is I want them all, like, they could start to make helium and they get $1 an hour raise when they could fill a dozen balloons in 3 minutes.
Yeah.
So that's our benchmark for it. And it really isn't that fast, and you'd be shocked at how fast they could get there, because otherwise what happens is it's taking them 5 minutes to fill it, and then with how many balloons.
Sorry, Alyssa, it got a bit hard to hear you for a second. Can you repeat that last sentence?
I said, if the more that you add time to it, then you're not going to make money, because a lot of it, again, isn't just helium is expensive, but it's not just the cost of what your materials are, it's the cost of the labor and your overhead for how long it takes you in order to put it together. So one of the things that I've heard people talk about is that they get balloons that go up and they float sideways or they tip. And there's a couple reasons that that could happen. The first one would be that you aren't adding enough. You're not spreading the high float evenly in your balloon, so it's more on one side than on the other side. And the other is that you added too much high float. So that would be the reasons that you'd be getting a tip, or you didn't add enough helium, like you didn't fully inflate your balloon. So I'm going to show you a double step next. So I actually high float my double step one a little bit differently than how some people do. So what I do for my double stuff is that's, putting the one balloon into the other. I do my outside balloon. Some people high float the outside balloon and don't high float the inside balloon. I don't high float the outside balloon. I do high float the inside balloon because I do it a little bit different. If you high float the outside balloon, then what I find is that sometimes these two balloons, they stick together, which is why I don't like to do it that way. So what I found works for us, and it won't hold an embellishment, is that I I float the inside, which is already done. And then I'm going to insert it into this one. So air doesn't leak out of the balloons as fast. So I like a puff of air with my outside one. And then I fill it with 100% helium on the inside.
Alyssa, will you tie this one with your fingertips toward the camera just so we can see how you tied it on one more time? Okay.
See that?
Yep.
Okay, so lay it like that. So I have my finger, the ribbon, the balloon. And then what I do is I grab it and see that. So what you're looking at is the ribbon is already through the center.
Mm-hmm. And the ribbon can slip through. For the person who asked, the ribbon can slip through there. So if you need to adjust it.
So I can slide it. I'm going to show you a good way to learn how to do that in a second. Let me get one more cold. I should have put more air into that one than I did. So I'm going to show what it should look
Dominique
like.
said, so basically tying a 260 in the balloon.
I don't understand. What do you mean tying the 260 in the balloon, Dominique? Hi, Dominique. Congratulations on all your wins at Fulcrum. She was like she won so many prizes. She should have gone and bought a lotto ticket because you won everything. Like it was
bought 28 of them.
Still, you were so lucky. That was sick.
So when I tie my 260s into once I blow up my balloon, I usually from what I'm looking at what you're doing, it looks like how I tie it in instead of like tying the 260 after I tie the knot in the balloons. Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, and honestly, usually with a double stuff, I don't know why on that one I was torturing myself by tying both of them because honestly, on a double stuff, you don't have to tie both of them. You could just like pull this one and tie it around, and the other one's going to be caught in it because that's so much easier than what we did before.
Nice.
So that way, then the ribbon's hanging in it. So do it that way. Okay, so what I'm going to show you next is how I height my balloon bouquets. And what we do is we have, sorry, don't mind my wicked wall. We have markings on the wall. So this is 6 foot, this is 5 foot, 4 foot, 3 foot, 2 foot. So 2 foot is our minimum for where the neck has to be if it's going to be a table height bouquet. So that way it's not in anybody's face. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yep. So just a time check, we are 6 minutes past the hour. I'm glad that you can keep going. Bill, I want to be respectful of your time. If you can hang on, we'd love to have you, but I totally get that it's late where you are. You're on mute. Oh,
We're talking about high float. This is a 17-inch
Yeah,
with a
I'm
tassel.
good.
you're
From
good.
December 10th. FYI. December 10th.
Wow. Yeah, but you don't
So,
want that dancing behavior at your party though, right?
no, but I'm just saying, like, it's starting to lose its air. But if you're wondering how long it lasts in the winter, I know it's a 17-inch, but still, that's crazy to me. Okay, I'm just going to show, like, 2 more things. How I arrange. I like to take them by color. And I line them up so that, like, the first one, it nestles into right. See how there's like this tiny itty bitty little curve? I like it to nestle just right in there. So that's what I do. And then I take my next colors and I'll do like one right at the top of this balloon next to it. And then I'll do one, this one I'm going to do right at the top of this balloon because I have 3 colors. I always like to have 3 for one color. And I'll do 2 for my others. So then this one, see, is kind of nestling right in between. And then right in between. It's actually an okay that I sold for tomorrow. And I'm going to take my 3, just put it right there. I like to then give it a tie. This is just our way of doing things. Everybody's going to develop their own way of doing things. One of the reasons that it's nice to tie it is if any of your ribbons are too short, then it doesn't matter. You're not going to lose it. We don't use weights. Some people use weights. I use a double stuffed water weight, and then we turn it into a little tiny cluster. This is a 6-pack, so it's 5 5-inch plus 1 that's filled to about like 6 inches. And then I'm going to just.
Does that count as weighting your balloons? Like, I don't know if you have that law where you are, but does that count?
So if I do 2 of them, then I pull in my separate foils on their own. This is how I work around that. State your question. But I like to cut my extra ribbons so that I just have 1 or 2 of them down.
Is curling them outdated? No.
I don't do tight curls. I like to do loose curls instead of tight curls. Okay. So some of the ways that you could increase the perceived value of the bouquet, because let's face it, we all want to make a lot of money, right? Is
Right.
that, for instance, I'll do, we call it teardrops. This is why I did 100% helium on the silver ones. So I'll purposely pick a certain color. And I tie it again to the ribbon. Then slide it up to the neck. And then I'll do one of those on like each of the silver balloons to be able to add that like little extra bit of flair to it. We sell one that's called a whimsical bouquet that we sell a lot. It's only 5 balloons, but then 3 of them get a teardrop and 2 of them get a curl. And even just for those 5 balloons, like we're able to still pay for $30 just because it has that extra little bit of perceived value added in from doing this activity that takes, 3 seconds to put it into it. And I mean, that's it. It's like very little, but they're like, oh my goodness, there's so many more balloons. It's literally 3 5-inch balloons, right? But it adds like just that little bit of being cute to it. So
Does it add weight if you were to like, would you ever spray latex helium floated balloons with the high float, high shine? Never. Okay.
No.
Okay.
I would not even consider that. It sounds like such a nightmare to me. So just because of bagging issues.
The mess and touching it, right? Okay.
Just absolutely horrible. Okay, so we reuse our bags as much as possible. Just because it cuts plastic waste, and actually we tell our customers that we do that as well, and they're fine with that. We're like, we like to recycle and reuse as much as possible to keep your costs down. And they're like, that's amazing, thank you. So for the bouquets, you want to make sure that you never put 2 bouquets into a bag, even if they'll both fit, because they're going to tangle together. I know that sounds really basic, but I have to tell, if you ever have staff and you tell them to bag your bouquets and say that you have like, they'll put it into the green bouquet and then they'll try to put 2 of these into one bouquet. And I'm like, what is wrong with you? So we would never bag this bouquet right now because we know that the high float is wet, but I'm going to show how I do it. This is a transport bag. The way that you can tell the transport bags is because they have the holes, they're ventilated, which does allow the high float to dry a little bit when they're inside, but again, it doesn't dry nearly as quickly. I like to just drop it in. And then I push everything down into it, and then I just do a loose tie. That's pretty, everybody can figure that out. Okay. If I'm, and again, I know I'm doing like a tie, but you don't know what people know until they ask you. If it's really windy outside, since we do the little clusters on the bottom, I actually put the clusters on the bottom when I get there and when I take it out of the bag, because if this part is blowing around or if it flips up, then these could get tangled into the bottom and it like pulls your bouquet down. So I get less tingling if it's a windy day, if I just bring it on the water weight and then I just put this on afterwards. Now, if I'm doing,
What is there a specific type of bag that is? I know it has the holes in it, but I've seen High Float has some of those. Is there a brand to that?
so High Float does have bags that are great bags. I'm really local to Brody's, so I like to use, so I always get their transport bags. They have two sizes.
Okay.
This is, I know this is my darling, so this is the white, and then they have the extra large ones that are green. And like I'll use this if I have a double number bouquet or a really big one, and they're both ventilated. High Float has a couple options. They have their standard bags, they have big bags, and then they also have their endless roll. So if you are doing like a set of 3, then you could cut off a small bag and then you just tie it on each end. Or if you have a huge bouquet that say wouldn't fit into this, then you would put it into the bag. But again, the bags are just as they're a local distributor to me. Usually when I'm like we pay for shipping when we ship from there, and the bags and the High Float are heavy, so I usually just do like 2 trips a year where I run out there, see everybody, and I pick up like 6 cases of each kind of bag and all the High Float and High Shine I think I need for the next few months.
There was one more question. Did you attach the 5-inch to the string or the neck of the helium balloon for that flare?
I attach it to the string. So I attach it to the string. So then that way it's just easier to move it. So that way if I need to adjust my bouquet, and sometimes you do adjust your bouquets when you get on site, because even if you do everything right, it might get a little bit tangled and it looks funky when you get there. So say that all of a sudden you get there and this balloon is all down here. But that's why I like to tie it onto the string too, in addition to saving so much time, because you're saving so much time because you're only doing one tie. You're saving your fingers, but also now I could put it back into place where it goes.
Okay.
Now, if you are tying, go ahead.
Sorry, there was another question in the chat, but finish your thought.
If you are going to be putting this outside, then after I get it set, you do want to do an extra little tie on it. Just you don't have to knot it, but just super fast, because then that way again, if there's wind, you're not going to be able to have the balloon fly off the string. But also, if you do something like this 5-inch, or if you do a curly key on it, that's also going to prevent it from flying off the string, just because see, it doesn't move as easily. I have to like either really push it or move this one and then move that one. So that's going to keep it from going off the ribbon as well.
Okay. There was one other question. Do you have any good tips for confetti balloons?
I was going to show you a confetti balloon. Yeah, they're so fun and not fun. Okay. One of the things that you can do for confetti balloons is that I don't ever do them with 11-inch. I only do confetti or glitter balloons if it's a larger balloon. So I do it for at least a 17-inch. Some people weigh their confetti, and honestly, I think that's a brilliant idea. I want to get a scale for it. Okay, so I'm going to put it into my clear. If I'm doing confetti on my own, then I do have one of those handy dandy stretchers, but I know that's currently in my transport van, which is at my house right now because I drove it home the other day and haven't brought it back yet after a delivery. So I can't show you that. So we're going to do glitter instead. After I put the high float in, I use air just to kind of separate it so that it's not all together. If I'm doing confetti, and I like this big confetti, what I'll do is I'll use that stretcher. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? It's like a little tiny clamp and you just push on it and then it goes whoop, and it opens up so that way the neck is bigger. That's how you do it on your own. If you don't have that, then you really need to like go like this. I could show you how I do them without, I guess, even though it's, again, it's one of those things that you learn if you don't have it, but it's not easy. With confetti, I have found that I'm better off not putting it all the way into the balloon, but leaving it in the neck. So I'm going to do, I have these big chunks. Because once it touches the high float, it starts to stick to each other. I always do my confetti balloons with high float. I don't know if that's what you're thinking. I'll show what happens with the regular ones because I have some of those pre-made. So see, it's in the neck. It's not even in the balloon because I have it high float in the balloon. And I'm going to use 100% helium because again, anytime you have a tassel, confetti, glitter, anything that adds weight, you need 100%. So I'm covering it.
So Bill also popped the confetti applicator in the chat, which he
Great.
can ship to you. You're off screen.
I didn't use enough confetti. Okay.
You didn't use enough? Okay. All right.
I haven't done one in so long because I hate them.
So
That's why
maybe this
you-
is a good question. We need some good tips for this. Okay.
Also remember on this stuff, I know, I'm not gonna lie, I don't do most of my production anymore. Bye, Philip. Hi. Yeah, I know. I'm so professional, right? Yeah. I'm whack my glitter. But that way, that's how you have the confetti in the balloon.
And when the high float dries, does it will it move around or will it stay stuck to the sides?
No, this is going to stay completely stuck to the sides, which is why I always do it with high float. A lot of our venues have actually banned using confetti balloons because they've become such a disaster. If you don't use the confetti balloon, see, look, this is when it's too heavy or not. See what I was talking about? This is why I don't sell a lot of confetti balloons. It's not spread evenly, so, and there's too much of it at the top, there's not enough at the bottom. So what's happening is that it's top heavy, so it's just not floating. That's a good example of what not to do. But we honestly took these off of our list of offerings because they give us so many problems. Like we have one bouquet that offers a confetti balloon, and it's a 24-inch confetti balloon, and we put a lot of confetti into it, and but those almost always float. And sometimes what we do is we'll start to fill it and we just keep on putting the confetti in and getting it evenly around while we do it with air. And then after the last time, then we add a little bit more and then we do the helium fill. We are lucky because most of our venues, I honestly too, that's the other thing is for about the last 5 years, our venues have started banning the confetti balloons because most people don't do the they get the ones where the confetti is already in the balloon. And then how that sticks is with static electricity. And you do almost need to have a little, I've heard that you need to have a little bit of air inside the balloon too. It can't be 100% helium. Otherwise it won't stick to the side. I do have one, so let me grab it. The main ones. Because I'll have customers who will drop them off to me and then I'll tell them, sorry, I'm not allowed to do this at your venue. Even if I am allowed, sometimes I just lie and say that because I don't want to. But like, it's our business, right? We get to run our business how we want to and say no to things that we hate doing.
Yeah.
And I hate doing these. Okay, so this would be one that like a customer dropped off to me that I didn't use. And you could tell because it has the little tiny rubber bands on the bottom. So I'm going to start it with this. Oh, see,
Oh,
this is why
see?
this is why I hate inflating balloons that customers give you because they're usually poor quality. So, but what happens is the confetti ends up sitting at the bottom. You could like rub it against yourself and create static, and then it'll stick to the side is the way that you really get it to go. I'm going to show you one more thing. This, you can look and you can see that the high float is almost dry. I have very, there's a tiny bit of water, but even in just about an hour, since it's not really humid in here, there's a couple little water bubbles, but it's really dry and pretty.
Mhm.
Does anybody want to see like how to do one of the bubble strand bouquets?
Sure. So there's one other question in the chat though. Does it go slower to inflate with the 60/40 valve? It seems slower than 100% helium.
It's slightly slower, but not a lot. I mean, we're still able to do like we just have our benchmark of a dozen in 3 minutes for when we fill. You need to be able to do all your inflation in 3 minutes if it's a bouquet with 12 balloons or less.
Okay.
When it goes slower is when you have less pressure in your tank, which is probably why it feels a little bit slower with the 60/40, but it's only adding about a second to your time. It's not adding a ton. They do have something that's called a split air. Like it's a product by Conwin, just like with your precision air. It's a dual split timer for inflating your balloons where you set it. And that's one of the things that you'll notice if you're ever using that machine is when the pressure starts to go down on your tank, it takes longer. All of a sudden your balloons will be too small. When it's nice to use that split air sizer is again, if you have just staff and you want to make sure that everything is sized exactly the same, but just beware that they sometimes don't they won't notice when the balloons are getting smaller because they might not have the eye developed the way that we do. The other thing is that with my high float, after we use it, we always put a 5-inch over the edge. So that way, if there's, it just keeps it moist so that you don't get like one of those nuggets inside it. And you also don't get any drips. Okay, so do people want to see like one of the bubble strands or do they all know how to do that? Or is there, what else do they want me to cover?
What is a bubble? What is the bubble strand?
Okay, so I feel like these are, well, that's what we call it. I don't know what other people call it. We call it a bubble strand bouquet. It's where it all goes up on the fishing line.
Okay.
So with that, I always start with at least a 17-inch. And the 17-inch again is going to be high floated, and you're going to use 100% helium because we're adding embellishments to it.
There's a few more questions in the chat around just like the 60/40. So I'm sharing the cost calculator with you guys in the community. You can download it, play with it. There are editable fields so you can do all your calculations. The cost difference is pretty nominal. We're talking about like, it's really not, I don't know that this is necessarily like for cost savings. I think it's more to stretch your tank so you have to go back and refill it, right, Alyssa? Like if you need to tank, I mean, sure, like if you're like the margin that you're making is more on the labor. That's the big difference, right? Like when you're selling this, your costs are like, I mean, there are costs of helium inside the balloons that we don't have with a garland, but you're using a lot less balloons. So it's the labor, it's the technique, it's the little details that you're doing here. So I don't know, let's say you're using it to stretch, but you're doing a huge volume, right? Anyone starting out is not going to be doing like that big a volume to make that big of a difference in their costs, right?
So we don't do a ton of helium right now. We've had our helium pickup recently, and we are going to be opening up a pickup location in light of Party City closing and kind of returning to my roots with that. So when I first started my business, I was going through 6 tanks a week. So because we were doing mostly helium, that was also when I was getting my tanks for $65 a tank. You want to know how old I am? How long have I been doing balloons? I got my balloons
Days are
for
gone.
$65 a tank. It's long gone. So it absolutely helped us to stretch between them when you're doing that kind of volume. Now I only go through about a tank a week, which I think some people consider to be a lot of volume, but we don't consider it to be a lot of volume. There's some weeks that we won't even go through one, and then there's some weeks that we'll go through 2. I right now only keep 1 tank full at a time. We replace it when the other one is half full. But I used to have 2 full, 2 going all the time, and then replace it when, as soon as the third one, as soon as one emptied, then I would always have at least 3 going at a time, just because it made it, we were going through more volume even just a few years ago. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm sorry. Okay, so on this, I do like to use a combination of 9-inch balloons. You can put high float into 9-inch balloons. With this little one, I only do about a half pump. I know that one of the questions that I was asked was if a 5-inch balloon will float, and the answer is yes for about 10 minutes. So that's as long as you're going to get out from it. Same with a 9-inch balloon. A 9-inch balloon that's fully inflated without high float is really only going to float for about, I don't know, I think it's like, what, 3 or 4 hours? Bill, do you know? That's with 100% helium.
Yeah, yes, correct. I always think about, 4 to 5 hours, maybe. What you have to understand is the latex balloons, they're going to float. As you see, Alissa, she's inflating these for her bouquets,
And I'm gonna do about
generously,
7.
generously,
Yeah.
okay? Because she wants them to last, okay? And that's going to add value. It's going to use a little bit more helium, but it's going to add value too. And it's also going to help support the extra weight with the tassel or the extra 5-inch latex that she's adding. You cannot inflate helium balloons, latex balloons, like you do balloons for a garland.
Correct.
And it all has to do with the amount of volume of helium in the ratio of the weight of the balloon. And that's something you'll figure out very quickly. So.
Yeah, 100%. So these are the only times, like these bubble strands are the only times that I will not inflate all the way. And that's because it is supposed to be round like a bubble. But you see, like this is a 12-inch that I inflated to about probably 8 inches, and it's not even upright. So it doesn't even have enough helium to float with being 60-40 plus high float. But the reason that I still use the helium is because even though this is 100%, is it's going to give the additional weight for it to, for this entire thing to last for a lot longer. So what I have is the top balloon is a 17-inch that's 100% helium, and then I do, my recipe is I do 2 to about like 10 and 9, just round them off, and then I do 2 9-inches to about 7 and 6. And then I add in 5-inch latex that I tie in as well. So you go ahead if you have more questions while I'm doing this. And again, I underinflate, round it. And this is the same technique. Like if you want to learn how to tie your ribbon in, tying it onto the fishing line is the exact same technique as tying the ribbon in when it's coming off of your spool. So then I'm going to add these. These are so popular. They're really cute. We sell them for $30 each. And they don't take that long to make, but the people love them. They're like, oh my goodness, I love those bubble strands. That's the coolest thing I've ever seen. I know, isn't it amazing? I like to mix textures. I think that one of the other things that adds value is if you do a double stuff or if you add in just not like all chrome, but do a couple of chromes in with your matte balloons. It's like a color thing that's super popular for this one. And then again, I would do a little triplet on the bottom. So just filling them and then tying it directly onto the fishing line. So that way it's you're able to slide them to get them better into place. So the other thing I do on this, see how ugly that looks with these little tabs sticking out, is we're just going to trim our tails and cut the nozzles off. Because that again just makes it look more professional rather than if you don't have the nozzles cut off. I feel like that's the kind of stuff that takes it from looking DIY to looking like they actually paid for it. Are there any more questions in the chat while I'm working on this?
I think some of it is around pricing. Michelle just wrote she's in northern Minnesota and she was quoted 1,000 for 200 cubic feet filled in a tank. Is that typical?
I would suggest calling more than one place.
Yeah, you might want to shop around.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I actually shopped around a little bit today. Like my prices, I know that helium prices are extremely regional, but I called 5 different places today because I was looking to see if I could get a better price, and I could go down about $30 per tank. But some people were quoting me more than $100 over what I'm paying now. So, Bill, go ahead. You were going to say?
Yeah, $1,000 for a 200 cubic foot, 219 cubic foot tank is that's extremely that's not reasonable whatsoever. It shouldn't be anywhere in the U.S. Although it does vary quite a bit. You know, a lot of times, like I was saying in the beginning, a lot of the industrial gas companies do not want to deal with just the individual user. Okay, they want to deal. They're industrial gas companies, and they want to drop off a large order. Although to you and I, you know, or a balloon artist, $400 or $500 for a tank or whatever it is, that's a lot of money. But to them, it's still not cost, you know, efficient. So look for somebody that's hungry for your business. You know, a small welder, a welding company, a smaller, you know, a party store, an independent, somebody you can even perhaps negotiate with. So, and if you, you know, anybody's, you know, feel free to email me if I can help point you in the right direction, or if you have questions. Obviously, we're not going to be able to help you with helium being in Atlanta, but you know, of course, be glad to help you how I can.
Yeah, one of the things I would suggest is a lot of the welders who will sell to us, what they do is they're more a gas company, so they sell like CO2 to a lot of restaurants and bars, where they're dropping off 4 to 5 tanks. So they're sometimes used to doing those smaller orders. So I would maybe go and find out like who's the distributor to the bars and restaurants that are nearby, who's dropping off CO2 gas, and then finding out if they distribute helium as well, because they might be willing to work at a little bit lower. Yeah, so I think that would probably be the best bet for how I would go. I would look up welding companies, and then I would just kind of maybe go into a restaurant and be like, hey, who do you get your CO2 from? And then try to find out from there, because that could end up being a good link for you.
We have two more questions. So maybe, if you guys have any further questions, I think we're kind of wrapping up here if you want to pop them in the chat. But Shalina is asking, her dual regulator leaks sometimes when she rotates it from latex to foil. One, do you know why that happens? And is there a quick fix you can help her? And then secondarily, are there any resources that she can just look to around using tanks or regulators outside of searching YouTube? Bill, do you have resources for this type of thing?
Yeah, outside of, now you're talking about purchasing tanks?
Shalina's looking for just more general info about using the tanks and the regulators because she seems to be searching on YouTube, but she has a specific problem with her dual regulator leaking sometimes when she rotates it from latex to
R-
foil.
Right. And that's just probably she has needs the O-ring to be replaced, or she has, a leak in one of the connections. When you get into the dual regulators, the 6040s, there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of connections. We're on just the regular tilt valve regulator with the rubber tip. There's not as many connections. Okay. I'll put a link in here for our accessory page and parts page for helium tanks, and that may be able to help her. Also, you're welcome to reach out to me. Are you going to put our emails in there, or would you
Yeah,
want me to
I
do
can
that?
share it. Yeah, I'll share
Okay.
this all in.
You're welcome to reach out to me. You can take a picture. I can talk with you further, and I'd be glad to do that and see if I can't walk you through some steps to kind of check it out.
Okay,
Because
one more question.
basically,
Sorry.
go ahead.
I want to address this too after both when you're done. Sorry.
If it's related, go ahead.
Yeah, it's related. So I had an employee who, when she was trying to take this off, instead of turning here because it was really tight because she forgot to release the crusher, what she did is she was like pulling on this part because you could see, sorry, it's hard to see, but there's like a connection right there and there's the connection here. And instead of loosening from here, she was loosening here. So we started to get a little leak on one of our valves. So just make sure that when you're doing it, that this is tight into here and that you haven't accidentally loosened this part, or even if you're like pushing it, see how when you're pushing it up and down, like I would think that it's possible to loosen this from going back and forth if you're moving it too much. We really don't sometimes put it up and sometimes put it down. We keep it pretty static so that we don't end up accidentally loosening this piece right here. So it sounds like that may be the issue, that you're doing that. And then the other thing too, because you can get leaky regulators, so always turn your helium off when you're not using it. Make sure that so when I was done, oops, I shut the valve. So even if this has a little leak, then I'm not going to be losing helium from my tank overnight. So and I think that what you're going to lose while it's on is going to be negligible.
Okay. This also jogs something that you mentioned earlier. So does helium expire? Linda chimed in and said it doesn't expire, but don't you have to certify your tanks? What's the process with an aging tank, I guess?
Okay, would you like me to answer that,
Yeah,
Alissa?
please.
Yeah, so, okay, there's a difference in expiration dates on a tank and that would be the length of time that is required where a tank would need to be pressure tested in order to be refilled by a gas company. Okay. Most tanks are good, most of them for 10 years, some of them for 5 years. Okay. Before they have to be hydro tested again. That's just for safety. And that really doesn't have to do with the helium. Helium does not expire. It doesn't go bad. It doesn't go rotten, doesn't spoil. And as long as the tank doesn't have a leak, which it shouldn't if it's closed properly and the valve isn't too old, it's going to stay in the tank, for the most part. So yeah, there's no Usually if you have a tank, you have helium in it, just keep it turned off when you're not using it and don't worry about it.
Okay. And then Dominique asks, the place that she would be getting the tank from, would they just swap the tanks? So I guess if that is, Dominique, is your question, like if
Yeah.
you're renting a tank, they
Yeah.
just swap out the tank, but if you own the tank itself, they fill it?
So, say if I purchased the tank and I would take it in and they would fill it, but when I come to bring it back, they just swap out the tanks. Like, so what she explained to us, like, I'll probably never see my original tank again. They just, when I need more helium, I'll bring it in. They swap it out and they give me another tank. Is that how it's?
Yes,
I'll
that
say, yeah, that
sounds.
works that way for me too.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what we do now. So we have 3 different cylinders that we actually sell. They're smaller tanks, and one of them is like the one Alissa has there. It's basically they're refurbished CO2 tanks, um, uh, and they're valved for helium. Okay, so basically with those, we sell the tank. The customer buys the regulator. They pay for the fill, and we basically set them up on what we call a swap out program, like you would a propane tank, for example. Now, some people they decorate, put stickers on their tanks. They want that same tank back. Totally understandable. We'll be happy to refill their tank. Okay, um, and we'll do it while they wait if we can. It just depends on who you're doing business with. Maybe there's not someone in our warehouse that's uh, has the experience to refill, so they're going to have to come back. But we do give them the choice. We can refill yours, or we can just swap it out with you.
So, so I had that conversation today because we had purchased tanks. It was, I mean, now I'm looking at about 7 years ago, and not one of the tanks that I have now is one of my tanks. They're all marked for Great Lakes, even my small one, because I got it once. That one doesn't matter, but since I'm considering changing helium companies to save money, they told me that I will, even though I just got these tanks, first they said that if I wanted to bring them in, they're like, if they're your tanks, that's fine, but they can't have any markings on them. So I'm going to have to sand them down to get rid of the marking from the other company. And then also, even though they're
Oh, she dropped mistakenly. Do you want to finish with that, Bill?
Yeah. Basically, what Alyssa's talking about is um, uh, most cylinders that are rented out by companies, for the most part, there's always exceptions, are owned by the person that's renting them. Okay, we rent our 2 largest tanks on a long-term basis and a short-term basis, meaning like a 3-day weekend rental or by the month. Then we have 5 sizes that are smaller, and those are only available for a short-term, like a 3-day rental. Okay, because first of all, there's not that much helium in there. And if we rented those long, we would never have to, it'd be too much to keep track of. It just doesn't make any sense. Um, so that's why we offer the option for people to purchase those tanks so they can keep it till it's empty. And when they decide they want to come get it filled again or swap it out, then they can.
Sorry, I don't know why my phone keeps dropping. I apologize, everybody. I think my Wi-Fi is, it's really windy here, so I think that's why. I apologize.
Okay, any other lingering questions? So I think this is a good time to wrap. This has been a lot of good information. I've taken a lot of notes, and I'm going to be sharing a spreadsheet that includes tanks and sizing info, high float FAQs and measurements, a cost calculator, what you need to get started, and then also some simple rules to follow, which based on like best practices that Alissa shared. If you have more questions, you can post them in the community. Alissa is active in there and can help with responding to that too. Linda's also in the community now, and Bill, I hope you'll join too. But hopefully this was a good session for you guys, and I'm really appreciative of your time.
Yes, thank you. Thank you
Yeah,
everyone for
thanks.
coming. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and everybody, good luck with your helium.
Yeah, you got this. You could do this. Let's get some good helium sales. The only thing that I would add is that when you are doing your bouquets, is that you do want to not remember to factor in your product cost, but also your labor cost. So time yourself, find out how long it takes you to make it, and also do your cost of running your business. And then you want to take your profit margin from that. Your price isn't just your labor from it. You need to like double it so that you're making money on it. And don't forget perceived value as well.
Yeah, and if I could too, just hit on that, and you're absolutely right, is that there's always more than one way to do things. Okay. Always don't let anybody, we're all experts, and we kind of live in our own bubbles sometimes as, oh, this is the way you're supposed to do it. No, that's not the way you price. Okay. As long as you're making money, there's not always a right or wrong way. Okay. Some can be better than others, but don't doubt yourself. Just use common sense. And a lot of times that'll get you going. And you can always change. And everything you're doing doesn't have to be permanent, you know. So good luck.
Yeah, I think that's the best advice. I always say that the people who make it in this business are the ones with the flexible mindset. Like if you're fixed in your ways and think that's the only way to do something, then you're going to get stuck that way even if it's not working and you'll go under. So just always have a flexible mindset. Be willing to learn. Be teachable.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys again. I really appreciate your time, and I look forward to the next one. Have a nice night. Thanks, Bill. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Alyssa.
Thank
bet.
you.
Don't use your customers' balloons that they bring in or they'll pop.
Good night.
Good night.